Redbad, the last pagan king of the northern Netherlands, which in 680 AD was called Frisia, refused to convert to Christianity because, as he said, he preferred spending eternity in hell with his pagan ancestors than in heaven with his enemies. It's not that Redbad was a tyrannical king. He was a pagan who was entrenched in his Christless roots and thought Christianity was to be fought against. Today, we celebrate a much different king. The Feast of Christ the King was instituted by Pope Pius XI in 1925, and one reason was to make a statement against the rising tide of secularism that had grown as a result of World War I. This secularism may have resulted due to the religious rhetoric that leaders used to justify the war and employ millions that were led to their death fighting, or even those that were exterminated because they were Christian Armenians. Fascism, Nazism was on the rise. The Middle East was realigned. Where once different sects of Muslims lived peacefully, they now were mixed together, and each were trying to assert their branch of Islam over another. In Pius XI's Quas Primus, he wrote that people have the natural and inalienable right to freedom from the state, that all citizens, both private and public, were to give honor and obedience to Christ, and that we should be forming our lives after the true Christian ideal. Our gospel ends with a similar statement about Christ. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Today, and in most recent weeks, we've been hearing of the end of times. We've heard that the sun will be darkened and the moon will not shine. The heavens and the earth will pass away. Then we will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. This is all descriptive, apocalyptic terms, and possibly a bit unsettling to us. We're used to living our lives where the sun comes up each day and the moon is visible. We can look up and see the clouds, maybe defining different forms or shapes in the clouds, but not that of Christ. Not yet, anyway. But this is meant to bring us comfort to what is to come. When we look upon the crucifix and see Jesus hanging on the cross, it's a representation of what Jesus had to do for us so that we may get to that ultimate life. That is of what to come. What we should keep in our minds, though, is that of the risen Christ, which is that of the resurrection to new life. We need to keep that vision of the resurrected Christ in our minds, for that is the truth. This feast reminds us that Christ is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, to our lives as Christians. What we now have will fall away to that of life with Christ in heaven, where he is King above all. In 539 BC, Persian King Cyrus the Great issued the first ever decree on human rights. He freed the slaves. He declared that all people had the right to choose their own religion, and he established racial equality. It seems we've been fighting for these things, freedom, equality, and civil rights, since the beginning of time. Jesus spoke openly and freely about these issues. This brought about the trial we heard of in our gospel. Pilate is asking Jesus if he is the King of the Jews. What this question is really asking was, is Jesus the Messiah? Pilate is asking Jesus if he is that descendant of David that was to come to save the Jewish people. Jesus doesn't state he is a king, but he states that his kingdom is not of this world. Here he's admitting that he has come to save, and he has done all that he has come to do. He finishes with saying, "For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. His admission as to who he is. Well, we have two kings, King Cyrus the Great, who fought for the rights of humans on earth, and Jesus, who died for the right of humans to go to heaven. Then the third king I mentioned, Redbad, the one who cared not for human rights on earth or to go to heaven. He is the one who rules secularly. This points to the cycle of secularism that rises and falls during the centuries. And today, we are in a cycle of rising secularity. This is something we all need to rise up against. And not only the secularism, but those purporting the false impression of Christianity that it's nothing but empty statements disguised as the truth. We must live the real truth, the real Christ. We can celebrate in our feast day that Christ is above all this. He is our Omega. He has risen above all other kings, good and bad. He has defeated that rising tide of secularity, as we too must. He has shown us the cycle of life to death, and with him we move from that cycle to that of everlasting life. We hear his voice as we hear the truth. We just have to accept and live in him. And one more thing, we have to always be ready.